In this video, we will learn how complementary genes interact to influence an organism's phenotype. We will learn about some examples of complementary genes and how disruption to a complementary gene pathway can stop some traits from being expressed. Gregor Mendel, sometimes referred to as the father of genetics, is widely credited with demonstrating the basics of gene inheritance in his pea plants. For example, he showed how traits like flower color or seed color are inherited from parent to offspring. Mendel hypothesized that genes are inherited independently of each other. This would mean that the gene for flower color would have no impact on the gene for seed color. However, we have since discovered that this isn't always the case, and complementary genes are an example of non-Mendelian inheritance. In humans, a single gene typically has two or more alleles that give rise to a particular trait. If there are two alleles, one tends to be dominant over the other. For instance, the allele for freckles is dominant to the allele that does not give freckles. If the allele for freckles is present in a person's genotype, it's highly likely to be expressed. We tend to assign letters to alleles when studying genetics. For example, we may assign the gene that controls the appearance of freckles the letter F. The dominant allele can therefore be assigned a capital F, and the recessive allele a lowercase f. The combination uppercase F, or uppercase F, lowercase f, will give the dominant phenotype of freckles, while two lowercase f's will give the recessive phenotype of no freckles. If a particular trait is controlled by complementary genes, it requires the dominant alleles of both of these two genes to be present. Let's look at an example to better understand this. Sweet pea plants can have purple flowers or white flowers. The color of these flowers is controlled by two genes. Let's call these genes gene C and gene P. For purple flowers to be displayed, there must be a dominant allele present for gene C and gene P. So how does this work? Here we can see a simplified view of the complementary gene pathway. Genes C and P work together to produce the purple pigment. You could say that they complement each other. Gene C controls the expression of enzyme C, and enzyme C catalyzes the reaction that converts precursor number 1 to precursor number 2. Whereas gene P controls the expression of enzyme P, and enzyme P catalyzes the reaction that converts precursor 2 into the purple pigment. This purple pigment eventually gives rise to the purple flower. Gene P relies on the products produced by the expression of gene C. So when there's a dominant allele of gene C and gene P present, the colorless precursors are converted into a purple pigment. If we don't have a dominant allele for gene C, the plant won't produce a functional version of enzyme C. And if enzyme C isn't produced, the reaction that converts precursor 1 into precursor 2 doesn't happen. And if precursor 2 isn't produced, then the final purple pigment can't be produced. We may have the dominant allele for gene C present, but if we don't have a dominant allele for gene P, a similar thing will happen. Gene P will not code for enzyme P, so enzyme P won't be produced, and precursor 2 won't be converted into the purple pigment. So in both of these cases, where we don't have a dominant allele for gene C or for gene P, the phenotype will be white flowers. Let's have a look at the genotypes that will produce these different phenotypes. We know that at least one dominant allele for each gene must be present in the genotype to produce purple flowers. So let's see what the possible genotypes are. For white flowers to be produced, at least one of the genes needs to have two recessive alleles. So let's see what possible genotypes white flowers have. And there's all the possible genotypes for these two flowers. Feel free to pause the video to take a moment to review this. Using what we know about the genotypes and phenotypes of flower color, and how it is controlled by complementary gene action, let's take a look at the inheritance of these alleles. Let's take two sweet pea plants that produce white flowers. One has the genotype C, lowercase p, and the other has the genotype c, uppercase P. If these two plants are crossed, what are the possible genotypes for their offspring? We can complete a Punnett square to show the possible genotypes. Since flower color is controlled by two genes, we need to use a Punnett square that shows dihybrid inheritance. Let's start by completing the column and row headers with the alleles that would be found in the gametes produced by each plant. Now we can complete each box in the Punnett square with the combination of alleles that could be inherited from the parents. You may notice that all the boxes are the same. This means that there is only one possible genotype that arises from this cross. The genotype C, uppercase P, lowercase p results in purple flowers. This is because for both gene C and P, there is a dominant allele present. If we think back to our complementary gene pathway, this means that both enzyme C and enzyme P are functional. So the purple pigment is produced. Now let's see what happens when we cross two plants with purple flowers. Again, we'll start by completing the column and row headers of our Punnett square with the possible combination of alleles that would be present in the gametes of these plants. Next, we'll complete each box in the Punnett square with the combinations that could be inherited when these gametes combine to produce new offspring. You may have already spotted that we have a lot more variation in the genotypes than we did last time. So let's go through the genotypes and see if we can work out the number of different phenotypes produced. And we'll record this information here. Remember, any genotype that has a dominant allele for gene C and gene P will produce a purple flower. If we circle all these genotypes in our Punnett square, we should have a total of 9 possible genotypes that give purple flowers. Now let's see how many will have white flowers. Any genotype that's missing a dominant allele for gene C or gene P will produce white flowers. If we circle all these genotypes in our Punnett square, we should have a total of 7 genotypes that give white flowers. Another way to say this is in the form of a ratio. So the ratio of purple to white flowers is 9:7. We call this the phenotypic ratio. Typically, in a dihybrid cross with genes that are not complementary, we would expect the phenotypic ratio to be 9:3 to 3:1. So this is another sign that complementary genes do not follow the normal rules of Mendelian inheritance. Now that we understand the action of complementary genes, let's try out a practice question. Flower color in sweet pea plants is an example of a characteristic affected by complementary gene action. The flowers can be white or purple. In this scenario, there must be a dominant allele present for both genes for the purple flower color to be shown. Which of the following genotypes would give a plant with white flowers? A. Uppercase A, uppercase A, uppercase B, uppercase B. B. Uppercase A, lowercase a, uppercase B, lowercase b. C. Uppercase A, lowercase a, uppercase B, uppercase B. D. Lowercase a, uppercase B, uppercase B. Or E. Uppercase A, uppercase B, lowercase b. Complementary gene action refers to the interaction between multiple genes that control the expression of a particular trait. Here, we're told that there must be a dominant allele present for both genes for the purple flower color to be present in the phenotype. In genetics, we tend to represent dominant alleles with uppercase letters and recessive alleles with lowercase letters. We need to spot the genotype that would give the phenotype of white flowers. This means that one or both genes have 2 copies of a recessive allele. Option A has 2 uppercase A's and 2 uppercase B's. Because this genotype has only dominant alleles, this will produce purple flowers. So this can't be the correct option. Option B has one uppercase A and one uppercase B. Because there is one dominant allele present for each gene, this genotype will produce purple flowers. Again, this can't be the correct option. Option C has one dominant allele for gene A and two dominant alleles for gene B. This will also produce purple flowers. So this is not the correct choice. Option D has two dominant alleles for gene B. However, gene A has two recessive alleles. We know that to produce purple flowers, there must be at least one dominant allele present for each gene. This genotype would therefore produce white flowers due to it having no dominant allele for gene A. This looks like our correct answer, but let's first double check option E to make sure it's incorrect. Option E has two dominant alleles for gene A and one dominant allele for gene B. Because both genes have a dominant allele present, this genotype will produce purple flowers. So this choice is incorrect. Therefore, we can conclude that the genotype that will produce a plant with white flowers is D, lowercase a, uppercase B, uppercase B. Now let's take a moment to go over the key points that we covered in this video. Complementary gene action occurs when two different genes work together to contribute to one trait. These two genes are usually involved in a specific pathway. If either gene has two recessive alleles, then that gene produces non-functional products. Without the dominant allele in both genes, that specific trait is not observed. Complementary genes are an example of non-Mendelian inheritance.